I just heard the announcement about the meeting being recorded. I assume we're live then?
We should be live. Yep.
Okay, and good evening and welcome all. This is our first virtual meeting of the Planning Commission to discuss the comprehensive plan. And our agenda tonight includes the Parks and Recreation chapter, the Economic Development chapter, and the Fiscal chapter. The first thing we'll do is we'll take a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Burns?
Commissioner Burns is present.
Commissioner Manellis?
Commissioner Manellis present.
Commissioner Strassen?
Commissioner Strassen present.
And Alderman Russell?
Alderman Russell is present, and Madam Chair, you might want to turn your camera on.
It looks like it's on. You can't see me?
I wonder if she's not showing up because she's using the headphones.
It looks like your telephone number is the primary user here and not your computer with the camera.
All right, we will just change that. Okay, how's that?
And echo chamber.
There we go. All good. Sorry about the technical glitch. To anybody who cares and is listening, I was trying to do something that I thought would be a good thing. So we just worked through that. So how we are going to do this is we're going to go through each of the chapters. And excuse me, I have to shut a door here. We're going to go through each of the chapters at the end of the chapter, after the end of the presentation and the discussion by the Planning Commission. We will take public comment, and how we're going to do this is anybody who wants to comment will call into the number, and that number is, and we will announce this a few times, it's 929-229-5669, and it has a password. The password is 952-444-745#. So I will announce the 4 last numbers of your phone number. You will be unmuted and you will be welcome into the meeting, and everybody who calls in for public comment will be sworn in at that time. So why don't we introduce or have the staff introduce themselves, and we will do a swearing in, and then we will turn it over to Brandon Marks, who is the host. I would say he's the host of this session.
Yeah, thank you. I can introduce myself, and then I can introduce all the staff members who are present here to support us tonight as well. So we'll be discussing the Parks and Recreation chapter, Economic Development chapter, and Fiscal chapter. As such, tonight with us is Bob Smith, the Deputy Director for Parks and Recreation, Richard Griffin, the Director of Economic Development. I believe Mary Ford Nail is going to be here. She is the Economic Development Manager, and Katie Barkdahl is the Director of Budgeting and Purchasing. Also is Joe Atkins, the director for planning, and Arash Garamani, our urban designer, who has been a tremendous help in this effort.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's do a group swearing in of all the staff who is here at this time. So you'll all, I'll read it, you'll raise your hand, I'll read it, and then each of you who are here, you will state your name and state I do. So if you raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the responses given and statements made in this hearing before the Planning Commission will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, say I do. Say your name and then I do.
This is Brandon Mark, I do.
This is Bob Smith, I do.
Richard Griffin, I do.
Mary Ford Nail, I do.
Katie Barkdale, I do.
Anybody else? Okay. Okay, so with that, I believe we're ready to turn it over to Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to thank all you planning commissioners and the staff that have joined us, and those of you who have been watching, who may be watching on YouTube Live. Tonight is the fourth Planning Commission workshop where we are discussing the 2020 Comprehensive Plan. Prior to this, we held meetings in January and February where we discussed the Introduction Chapter, Land Use Chapter, Transportation Chapter, Water Resource, Historic Preservation, Environmental Sustainability, and Housing Chapters. I anticipate us getting through the Parks and Recreation, Economic Development, and Fiscal Chapters this evening. And I'd like to announce the future dates that we have scheduled at this time, so those of you who may be watching know to tune in then. On Tuesday, March 19th at 6 p.m., we'll be discussing community character and urban design. On Tuesday, May 26th at 6 p.m., we'll be discussing municipal growth chapter. On Monday, June 1st at 6 p.m., we'll be discussing the implementation chapter. On Tuesday, June 9th at 6 p.m., we'll be discussing the roadway classification map. And lastly, on Monday, June 22nd at 6 p.m., we'll be discussing the proposed land use map. Tonight, I anticipate us going through each chapter, you guys asking staff and our subject matter expert some questions after we give an update of what has changed or been revised since the 2010 plan. And then after that, we can go into the policies and you guys can ask us questions after that. So we'll start with the Parks and Recreation chapter. And Bob Smith is here as our subject matter expert, and I'll give a brief update on that. Just give me a minute here. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so what you're seeing now is our draft layout, and I'll provide a general summary of what has changed since the 2010 plan. Generally, the city strives to meet the National Recreation and Parks Association recommendations by providing 10 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. In 2010, we had 61 parks, 440 acres at an average of 8 acres per 1,000 residents. Today we have approximately 75 parks totaling over 800 acres, averaging 11.1 acres of parkland, which we now meet that standard. A major contributor of that acreage was when the city acquired the 148-acre Hargett Farm, or the West Side Regional Park, in 2008. This has been studied extensively since then. So we summarize this in this chapter, and this is a new section where we basically summarize the efforts since the acquisition. The next major update what in this chapter was, at the time of drafting it, the city, the city were anticipating a commencement of a Parks and Recreation Master Plan that would put a lot of time and effort, outreach, and science into the long-term goals and vision of our parks. So in this chapter, we summarized the master plan efforts and the goals and basically the RFP process and onboarding a consultant for that. As many of you are probably aware, due to the COVID-19 crisis, the mayor and board of aldermen adopted that maybe now is not the best time to onboard that consultant, and I guess delayed it for the decision to sign that contract for 6 months. So that's pretty much the gist of this chapter. And I will stop sharing my screen as soon as I figure out how. There we go. So if you have any questions, let us know. Bob's here as well.
Okay, so the process again is Brandon is going to give an overview of each of these chapters. I'm going to do a roll call, and then after that, he will go through the policies, and then we'll do a roll call for questions. So this is a roll call for the overview. Commissioner Burns.
Most of my comments are, Ron Burns here, most of my comments are oriented towards the policies. The one thought I had, since we're highlighting climate change in this overall comp plan, I'd like to maybe ask a question whether or not the Parks Department might be thinking about extending the swimming pool hours from just Memorial Day to Labor Day to even greater hours going forward, both from a budget standpoint, from a logistics standpoint, with difficulty getting guards beyond college startups and stuff like that. But if we are going to be having more extreme and longer summers, then maybe that could be brought into the thinking. Other than that, and that's pretty far down into into detail. I have no broad comments. I think it looks good.
Okay. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comments.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no questions.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here. I do have a couple of comments. Glad to see that we've reached that national standard of 10 acres per 1,000. I know that about a year or two ago, we did some analysis as regarded how close each residence was to the availability of parkland. And I remember that analysis was it was like a half a mile radius or something like that. I think economic development might have that information, but I thought something that might be worth mentioning in the overview in addition to that ratio. Additionally, in mentioning the watershed, and I know it's discussed further in other sections, but maybe just a sentence as to what the watershed is. People may not be aware that we own 7,000 acres of pretty much undisturbed forest up on the mountain. And then I wanted to suggest that we talk about the MOU with Sophie and Madigan's Playground. We're currently, we have an agreement with the National Park Service for historic preservation workshop out there now, and we're discussing a future partnership with them that would be even more extensive, and so I think that's probably worth a bit of a mention in there. And then Brandon mentioned the fact that we have delayed the consultant to look at it again in about 6 months. Those are my comments.
Thank you. I had one comment. I think it's actually very impressive that over the past 10 years, the city has gone from 61 to 74 parks and from 8 acres per 1,000 to 11. I think for context, that is very useful information to include in here. And if there's any sort of summary as to how that happened, what were the major measures that were taken that over the past 10 years that allowed the city to fill that gap.
Okay.
All right, so we go to policies now, I guess, correct?
Sure. So I guess I'll summarize some revisions or research that I'm going to do. And if Bob wants to chime in on the climate change and extending the pool hours, feel free to. So Arash and I are going to work on a bubble map to look at how many residents are in proximities to all the parks and give an average on that. We'll expand the definition of the watershed and include the National Park Service into the language as well. So,
Brandon, if I could, I can jump in there.
Sure.
Bob's Director of Parks and Recreation. With regard to extending the pool hours for the summer, that's something that agencies, municipalities all over the state and the region look at doing. Some organizations will extend hours mainly on weekends. I guess the trend that we find with the pools is that after July 4th, overall attendance begins to decline. When the pool first opens Memorial Day, it's usually fairly busy. It's the new thing to do because you haven't been to the pool since the previous summer. And then once July 4th hits, we see those numbers decline. It is true that we do have warmer weather in September. Like I said, certain municipalities are looking at extending that. There are hurdles to that. The bulk of the lifeguards for the pools are high school and college kids. The college kids are back at school. The high school kids are back in sports. So like I said, it is something that has been looked at. Are there any definitive plans right now to do that? There are not, but it is something that we can continue to look at. And 6 months down the road, when we can get that Parks Master Plan consultant on board, hopefully, we can certainly dig into that much deeper. With regard to the residents' distance from parks, I believe it was just over a half mile. I don't have that exact number in front of me, Brandon, but I can reach out to Matt Bowman. Matt's the one that provided that number. I'm sure we can get that number.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Okay, Brandon, it's back to you, right?
Okay. Policies. So policy 1, I'll note that I noticed that there is a typo in here. It went from 2 to 8. So policy 1 is adopt a Parks and Recreation Master Plan to provide a framework for consistent planning, acquisition, development, and administration of the Parks and Recreation resources, programs, and facilities. Policy 2, expand the city's green corridors and trail network to improve pedestrians and bicycle access to parks and regional trails. Policy 3, which is noted as 8 in the draft, promote the appreciation of Frederick's historic and cultural heritage and park system planning and design. And policy 4, collaborate with Frederick County and other agencies to enhance parks and recreation facilities for the city residents. I will note that we went from 9 policies to 4 policies, but we did a consolidation of a lot of policies into the first policy, which is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, where a lot of in-depth study and consideration would come out of that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take a roll call again for comments and questions on the policies. Commissioner Burns.
2 minor comments, and my comments are written in the Gmail docs. On policy number 1, regarding the master plan, I'd like to make sure that there at least is some action plan or implementation plan as part of that document. I'm sure it's been scoped already, so this may be moot, but I think we need to put an emphasis on what actions need to occur. It's great to show the end state, but how are we going to get to the end state? Step 1, step 2, step 3. One way to do it is to list all the initiatives or all the projects that need to be done, and then break them into short-term, mid-term, long-term, based on the low-hanging fruit projects being in the short term, and the more expensive, more challenging projects being long-term. And I think any kind of a functional master plan needs to have that end end product where you go into the action items and the time frame for recommendations. The other comment I had actually was, no, that's it. That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Manalis.
Hello. The only comments I have is one, spelling out the acronyms that are there for at least policy 1. I see NRPA, and then the numbering, which Brandon already brought up.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen, I don't have any comments.
And Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here. With reference to what I mentioned in the previous discussion about the proximity of residences to parks, is that something, in addition to the NRPA goal of 10 per 1,000, is that something that we want to put into policy, some sort of desire to have all residences within a certain distance of parkland to help sort of distribute it? And then the other comment I had with regard to Commissioner Burns' suggestion on the action plan, it might be helpful if we, as we talk about the Parks and Recreation master plan that's going to be underway, maybe sort of spell out what the scope of that is so that there is an understanding of the pieces that will be supplied in it. Just to say Parks and Recreation master plan, we don't know really what that means. So if it incorporates an action plan with short, midterm, and long-term goals, or whatever, just sort of give us a little bit of explanation of what's the scope of that project.
Okay, noted.
Okay, Commissioner Nicholas, my only comment was also about the master plan and if we should have a by when. So adopt a Parks and Recreation master plan within the first couple years, or a by when. Again, I think it would give it a little bit more context on which to build from.
Okay. So if I could follow your comments and suggestions up, just for clarification, policy 1.6 states establish and maintain a monitoring system that measures progress towards achieving the goal of the Parks and Recreation master plan. Per Ron and Kelly's suggestion, would you like me to expand that of some sort, or does that capture the intent?
Commissioner Burns, I thought I heard you talk about something that was not just a monitoring, but it was putting an action plan in place of which then you monitor the progress towards that action plan.
Yeah, I would say that monitoring is one thing, but having like target, I guess, is something else.
I'm sorry, I was muted, and our chair said it is better than I could have said it. But yeah, they're two separate things. Monitoring is like looking at the progress on how well you adhere to the goals, and I think almost any program in government needs to do that, and we rarely do. But the action plan is to say here is prioritizing the projects.
Understood.
I would also chime in as far as by when this plan might be adopted. Right now, we're pretty tenuous in making long-term plans for commitments of large amounts of funding, so I would not really be comfortable with committing ourselves to anything too terribly specific at this point.
So my comment about the master plan was, and that's an excellent point, because as we went through all three of these, I kept thinking about our reality today and how that would impact all of this. My point was more about when the master plan would be created, the plan itself, not so much when it would be implemented, but if we don't have some kind of a target, it could get created by the end of the 10 years and it looks like we may have actually accomplished this, but I doubt if that's the intent.
Well, Alderman Russell, I would just chime in that the price tag on the consultant is $250,000, and so we're going to be very
That's a good point.
Prudent.
Well said on that one. Okay. Let me make a comment on our protocol here. It appears, unlike the hearings, we really have to follow a process and establish quorums and do things here. I liked at the end, after we all had a chance to have our comments and questions, sometimes it made sense. So somebody could ask a question, a commissioner can answer it, etc. That seems to work. So as we go forward, assuming that it still works, I think that's a good protocol for us to do. Okay. Any other comments on this chapter? Okay, so let me actually go back to the participants.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We only talked about the policy, the first policy. We still have the rest of the policies to discuss. We discussed policy 1.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought Brandon had read all 4 of them in, and that we were talking about all 4, and he and I were emailing earlier today. So
I'm sorry, I only commented on policy 1. I thought we were going one at a time.
I did read all 4, and if you have...
Let's actually go around again with commissioner comments on the other 3 policies then.
I would prefer, I'm sorry, I would prefer we do one by one, yes.
Okay, that works fine. So we're on policy 2 then, and Commissioner Burns.
I actually have no comments, Commissioner Burns, here on 2, 3, or 4.
Okay, Commissioner Manalis.
I already gave my comments, which was for all 4, so no further comments.
Commissioner Strassen.
I also have no further comments on the remainder of the policies.
Alderman Russell.
I'm sorry, I had seen some comments on the Google Docs that indicated that there had been some feedback on the other policies, so maybe that they have already been addressed. There was a question about number 2, requiring the construction of shared use paths, and the question was being required by whom? And so I think clarification that those would be required by new development to construct the portions of shared use path that fall within the boundaries of that development, to be clear on that. There was a comment about developing a prioritization of capital projects with emphasis on completing missing links. I wanted to comment that missing links are most likely the priority, but we do have some other sections, for example, the Rock Creek section between Bachman's Lane and Home Depot that is really unusable as it is now as a shared use path that needs to be improved. And then we've been talking about that. So missing links may not always be the priority, which had been suggested. And then there was something about coordination with other, I don't have that comment. And then in policy 3, which is 8 or which is 3, there had been the addition of the word in number 2, promote and facilitate performing arts. And then lastly, in policy 4, number 3, encourage Frederick County to provide additional resources. And there was a question about what the resources were. And now I can't see my Google Notes, but I know I had written something about potential sources of resources from outside of the city, but I can't find it on my doc right now. That's all I had. I just want to make sure that those things have been addressed.
Noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to give the number again for public comment, but right now as I look at the participants, I do not see any phone numbers, so it does not appear anyone has called in for public comment. The phone number to call in is 929-229-5669. You'll be prompted for a passcode. That's 952-444-745#. Just wait a minute.
We really must get a short snippet of 30 seconds of music playtime for
I just
the
felt
Jeopardy
like,
song.
yeah, that was
That's
actually
exactly what I was
running
thinking,
through
the
my
Jeopardy
head.
song.
Okay, no phone numbers are popping up. So I guess that wraps us up on that chapter then, Brandon.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate your attendance this evening. So we'll move into the economic development chapter, and I will share my screen. The draft layout of these chapters is put together by Arash, and hopefully when we're all finished reviewing these chapters and we take in all of your comments, we will be able to present you with a document with all the revisions that you've noted and the final draft for workshop and public hearing. So I'll give a brief summary of the economic development chapter, and I believe Richard and Mary are here. This chapter was expanded greatly from what it was in 2010, and it's a lot more detail. So I will give a summary of that. In general, it summarized our business and economic landscape as doing great with a few challenges. Currently, there are approximately 54,500 jobs and 3,786 businesses located within Frederick. That's a job to household ratio of 1.9, which is really good. And Richard can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's an average in our region of 1.4 to 1.6. So that's a really good indicator of our economy. The chapter summarizes that our successes are due to the educated and skilled workforce location in the region to DC, Baltimore, and other counties, and the diversity of our industries that support major federal facilities. Currently, we're trending towards technology talent in the tourism industries, including biotechnologies, breweries and distilleries, and Bitcoin technologies. I think this is important when we think about this in the context of land use and future land uses for our industrial or major general commercially zoned areas. This chapter also touches on the current employment numbers, which is trending downward of 2.8%. Obviously, this may have changed due to COVID, but hopefully that's only temporary. The major employers are, for the most part, are normal major players. Fort Detrick, Frederick County Public Schools, Frederick Health, Frederick County Government, AstraZeneca, Wells Fargo, and there's another list, or there's a larger list of our major employers. The chapter also summarized the opportunities, investments, and challenges that face the city for the next 10 to 20 years. Some of the challenges that are listed in the chapter are the competitive cost to housing and our tax rates compared to neighboring jurisdictions, the predictability and risk associated with development codes, and infrastructure challenges, including congestion. Do you have any questions? Glad to answer. Richard and Mary are also here.
All right, well, we will, again, we'll do a roll call, and after we do that, if we have a back and forth with questions and comments, then we'll see how that works out in this environment. So, Commissioner Burns.
Yes, Commissioner Burns here. A fair amount of comments. Some of them probably not worth discussing. Some of them certainly worth discussing. I think a couple of the themes here is in economic development, we need to build on our strengths. So what are our strengths? One is, as I see it, is in downtown, is Cow Creek. And I think Cow Creek and the Linear Park is great on weekends, but it tends to be largely, I think, underutilized for the investment of money that's been put into it, especially east of East Street. It's like a ghost town, so to speak, right now. And as you go, even between Market and East, other than weekends and lunchtime or weekdays, it's underutilized, and largely because there's not a lot down there. So I would think that somewhere in the discussion we need to center or direct growth. Smart growth used to be called direct growth, both political and direct. But direct, try to help facilitate. And I think what we did last night in the overlay zone for the creek was a step in the right direction to make it very appealing. I think the text needs to talk about that. But that's one broad point I'd like to bring up. The second point, a little more specific, and I would ask that we really stop promoting Mark and I think Mark.
Commissioner Burns, you're having the same kind of problem you were experiencing last night and breaking up.
I'm sorry.
It's very difficult to hear you. You're breaking up a little bit.
It's possible maybe that someone else in the family is on.
It's better now.
You see, I've tried to save $10 a month on Comcast, and that's whatever. How am I sounding now?
Good.
It's better now.
Much better.
Well, maybe if I speak slower too. The other thing is we have the potential, at least the way plans are going, to get additional lanes on I-270, and they're called toll lanes. And unless things shift in a different direction, there's a lot of inertia going into that investment. And we're at the end of this project. And one of the problems we have as far as transit is concerned is that we're unconnected. Mark currently and will never in my lifetime have more frequent trains. Monorail, while it might have been a good idea 10 years ago, compared to the potential for bus rapid transit is so much more expensive when it comes to station costs and things, and not only station costs but line costs. So if we have toll lanes and we have buses with the ability to go 70 miles an hour down I-270, it seems to me that bus rapid transit is the only way that we might ever get 7 days a week, good headways, and be connected with the rest of the UC area. So I had some comments in the text which speak for themselves, but I think we need to get off monorail and Mark, and again, not to trash them, because it's part of a complementary system, and we're going to need to have those components. But I think we need to really focus on BRT, and the secretary's transit workforce is going to be coming out with a final report, which will be very timely, and I hope that you can take advantage of that in the coming weeks, and as well as the plans that MNC PPC are doing in Montgomery County, where they're looking at the bus rapid transit from our North Frederick station, at north of town, at Monocacy Boulevard, all the way to Tyson's Corner, including North Bethesda, Gaithersburg, and points in between. So that's my speech, and that's my input on our broad level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
Hello. So let me see. I have like 4 broad comments and then some specific comments throughout. And I guess my first comment is I was in reading this chapter, I was looking at the different headings and reading the content. And I was curious, I noticed that there was an opportunity, opportunities, where am I? Opportunities, and then it jumps to investment and economic development, and then it mentions the challenges. And I was wondering if we see any value in having a section on threats, or, you know, maybe threats, or maybe emergency management, something related to threats to our economic, in the future, threats to our economic development, and how we, you know, see ourselves protecting our economic gains, and helping, I guess, businesses throughout be resilient. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I'm pretty sure that, you know, after having the other things like H1N1, avian flu, and all these other diseases, I can safely say I'm sure that we might have more in the future. Mm-hmm. And this document, I wanted to see something more in there that spoke to how, you know, within the economic development framework, how we will see ourselves in 20, 30 years in terms of being resilient and having some kind of mitigation strategies to help us protect our gains and move forward. So that was one of my comments. So emergency management and mitigation. The second comment, maybe also question that I had was, how does the land management, okay, so my topic for that would be adequate infrastructure. How does the land management objectives chapter goals support our economic development goals? So in other words, like, you know, we want to attract businesses. Do we have enough space? Where will they be located? Will we be building up or building out? Like, what is our plan? Like, do we have, you know, adequate water, sewer infrastructure, stuff like that, roads for these businesses, and what that would look like? And if we don't have enough space, like, what's the plan for 20, 30 years from now? That was my second comment on annexing, is what I was thinking, annexing. Are we going to be getting, you know, acquiring more land? The third was, let me see, what was my third comment? I was thinking about consumer spending. I noticed that we talked about on the first page, in the overview towards the bottom, we talk about what successful economic development for Frederick means. And we talked about attracting skilled and young professionals. We talk about, you know, startup companies and so forth. But I was wondering, so our residents are also vital to our economic success. And I don't see that framed anywhere in there, like, you know, consumer spending, how does that contribute to our economic development? Or how do we see that supporting our economic development in the future? Let me see, what else did I have? I was also curious, but this is more of a curiosity, about the ratio or the dollar amount in terms of, I already know how much tourism brings to Frederick, but I was curious about what consumer spending brings to Frederick, but that's just a, you know, curiosity thing. The last question I had was business taxes. Like, I guess I wanted to see more about, what is our tax plan or tax strategies for attracting more businesses here. I know we mentioned attracting businesses, attracting talent. I was just curious about, how do we, what's the plan for the future, the next 30 years? Like, what does our tax plan look like, our tax strategies look like? And that was really it for the broad comments. The rest of the comments, I think like Commissioner Burns, I could type in the section. I don't think any of them right now stand out. Some of the stuff I already mentioned, I had like emergency management, stuff like that. I already mentioned some of that stuff. Let me see anything else I have. And I could have missed it, and quite frankly, we're reading so much new. I was wondering, the Golden Mile, in terms of revenue, how much revenue do they bring to the city? How are they part of this? I know I saw downtown Frederick. I think in the where did I see that? I think starting on page 9 or 10, I saw biopharma, and I think I saw businesses and workforce infrastructure development. I think downtown Frederick was mentioned. I see the Golden Mile. But I was curious. There are businesses, in the Golden Mile, and I was just curious about how they contribute to the economic development of the city. And that was pretty much it, I guess. And then basically, how do we measure our success? Like, is there something in here that's going to speak to, I don't know, what our goals are, and how do we, measure ourselves to determine that, that we're going into that direction that we want to be in 20, 30 years. The rest I'll just type in the Google Docs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Strassen.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So a couple questions, but one really quick question is, what is a Bitcoin technology? Am I the only one who has not heard of that? And if other people haven't, then can you also explain what it is in the document? But could you explain now too? Because I'm like, what's a Bitcoin technology?
This is Richard from Economic Development. It's referencing a newer information technology financial system that is becoming quite popular around the world.
I did see about Bitcoin in an episode of Big Bang Theory, so it's not a totally.
Believe it or not, it's interesting that you have companies now that are beginning to look at very new and innovative technologies that are out there. And although blockchain and Bitcoin technologies are still relatively new, the fact that we have some of those companies here in Frederick that are doing work in that sphere gives us opportunities in the future. And so it was simply just referring to kind of new technologies that are on the horizon.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So then one of my other questions was, so we talk about what's been trending. And so I was thinking to myself, well, was that trending because all of those, so biotech, breweries, Bitcoin, was that just because they happened to find Frederick, or did Frederick go out and find them? And if we went out and found them, what industries do we want to go find and bring to Frederick in the next 20 or 30 years? And then my last question, as I'm sure everybody was thinking, is it too soon to really have a good understanding of what the long-term economic impact of the COVID-19 is going to have on Frederick? And do we even include some kind of assessment like that in here or not? I don't know. That's what I was thinking as I was reading all of those wonderful numbers. I'm like, but they're not so good now. So that's all. Thanks.
That's a good question.
Well, one of the things about going last is so many of your comments have been said, and in fact, there was actually one or two that I was like,
You're not last.
Hello.
"Oh, I'm sorry."
I'm so sorry. I think you may have
Alderman
missed Alderman Russell.
I apologize.
Do not
Alderman Russell.
apologize. You are last. You're just not ready yet.
I'm
be
not
last.
ready to go.
I wanted to just say thank you to Commissioner Burns for his comments on the transportation system. He is spot on there. I think Commissioner Manalis, you raised some fabulous questions about resiliency and how are we going to protect our economic investments into the future as we've been sort of slapped in the face with what's going on now and caught not as prepared as we ought to be. I think we're all learning a lot of lessons from that. You mentioned the availability of space for new businesses, and I think one of the challenges that we're facing now that we're starting to see is as we've all been forced into this teleworking situation, we are discovering that you can sure get a lot done and you don't have to necessarily go into the office. And so that whole landscape is going to be changing. And how do we possibly predict that? And then to Commissioner Strawson's point on the Bitcoin and blockchain and all of that jazz that I don't understand either, don't feel bad. Do we have a segment that is part of the gig economy here in Frederick? Is that something that we need to, is that something that's going to come and go? Is that,
That's a good point. Yeah, we could add something on that.
It's just, it is sort of alluded to in the looking at how the workforce used to go to where the jobs were, and now people are looking for the experience and bringing the jobs with them. So I just want to make sure we're thinking about that. I think that's all I have. Oh, and then the other point with the Golden Mile. We do have a lot of areas of the city besides downtown Frederick that are great contributors to our economy, and we also have a lot of business that is not technology or pharma or medically based. A lot of the retail and restaurants and craft breweries and all of those other things. This does put a lot of emphasis in the biopharma entrepreneurs workforce kind of thing. I want to make sure that we're not too heavily weighted one way or the other, and that we acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of just sort of your standard retail businesses that are incredibly important to our economy. We want to continue to focus on recruiting them as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now it's my turn.
Now it's your turn.
And I had like 4 themes, and basically I could move on because just about everything had been said, but I will underscore a few things. Resiliency, that was the word that I circled also from Commissioner Manalis. And so everything that you said about what needed to be there as far as the threats, et cetera, when you hit upon that word, I thought that really encapsulates what we're looking at. And most likely if we just hadn't gone through and aren't going through what we're going through now, resiliency may not ring so true, but that was a great word and excellent point. As I've said, and I'll probably continue to say, just because it's how I think when I read these chapters and I read these great statistics, if you don't have context for them, I don't really know what that means and how great it is. So going back to 2010, where were we at that time with the people in the workforce and the unemployment? And one thing that Brandon said when he was giving the overview, he mentioned the regional average was 1.4 jobs per person or whatever that was, and we're at 1.9. That's like an excellent statistic to put in here, because it's just not a fact, but it characterizes where we are now in the scheme of things. Industries we are targeting. I had written that down, and those words came right out of Commissioner Strawson's mouth. So that was exactly, and I had it sounds like you're targeting these. I thought you were probably targeting these, but I think when I hear the person from the state talks about their eds, meds, feds, and beds, and these are the 4 big targets, or they have been the 4 big targets of the state. I think being really clear about what are those targets, what are those strengths, what are we going to intentionally build on here in Frederick? And then my next one was also COVID. That we need to address this in every section, but in economic development, it's critical. I can't even say what it would look like now, but that will absolutely impact the short term as well as the long term. And just to be able to understand how we incorporate that into this chapter is really it's gonna take some thoughtfulness about that. Is when you read it 3 months ago, as we hear our president say, we had incredible statistics.
Yeah.
And we don't know. We don't know if a year from now that we can bounce back to that. So, and my last one was actually about retail. And Alderman Russell was talking about that. So, as you all know, this is my life and it's what I deal with. And I think about what some of the charm and strengths of the city of Frederick are. And we have major pockets of retail. So, and not just the city, but like right beside the city. But as far as the city, we do have the downtown, we have the Golden Mile, and we have some smaller neighborhood sections. But how is this world of retail going to impact us and impact tourism? And just think about this new normal. Well, 2 things as far as retail. How's this new normal going to impact the experience of being in downtown Frederick? And how's it going to impact we have one of the best, most robust restaurant scenes. We did. So this is going to impact that. And looking at the fallout in retail, and not a day goes by that I don't get an email that there's another Chapter 11. Yes, most of these are, well, they're J. Crew, they're Neiman Marcus, etc. But when we come out of this, how many of our small businesses will be able to actually open back up?
Right.
And how, so again, I don't know how we exactly capture it all here, but it's got to reflect that, or this document will not appear to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's me.
I did have one more thought, sort of building on what Alderman Russell had mentioned. I don't know if this is the time that you want to hear it.
Yep.
But if we're envisioning creating a Frederick that makes it super easy for people to telecommute and work at home and work remotely, we need to work on and improve our plan for telecommunication. As we heard Commissioner Burns say earlier, limiting bandwidth within a house really affects the ability of people to multiple work at home. The same thing happens locally. I mean, I've talked to my neighbors. I'm on South Carroll Street, and all of my neighbors who are fortunate enough to still have jobs and be working at home, their ability to work at home is limited because we only have Xfinity in downtown, and Xfinity only has limited bandwidth available for our part of the town, and too many people on the block trying to do this thing at the same time, and they're not going to be able to work.
That's great.
So I don't know where in this plan telecommunications is included, but if we're going to change the way that we work, then we do telecommunications in Frederick, for sure.
And to expand on telecommunication, it's all the different things that you need this broadband for.
Right.
It's it is the education at home. And it's, so we've learned so much. And I remember reading articles the past couple years about areas around the city, around the county, as well as the city, that don't have the connectivity that they need. So this actually would be a great goal for the city to assess and take on.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, this is, Commissioner Manalis, I just have a side comment more so broadly than not necessarily about this chapter, but yeah, this whole COVID-19 thing really, makes me wonder about the previous chapters that we've had, and, the things that we think that makes Frederick quaint and unique, and its, special characteristics and what attracts people to come here, and tourism. I'm like, the tourism, I'm like, how does this impact us in the future, economically wise? Because I mean, we're now, wearing masks, keeping 6, feet apart, so it just makes me think to myself, I wonder what our future will look like, in terms of tourism, in terms of us just walking down, walkability, walking down the street, going out to dinner, stuff like that. It's just really interesting. So just curious about that, just a comment.
I will add that we are thinking about that as staff, having meetings with our team on how we incorporate COVID-19 into the plan. We are drafting a large introduction section on how it's going to have planning implications and how we look at land use in the future, zoning, etc. But we will have to do, before we present this to you at a workshop, go through the plan with a fine-tooth comb and how we look at the implications of COVID for all the policies that we've created. So it does change this plan a great deal.
So,
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, this is Richard Griffin. I don't know if now is the appropriate time for me to say a few remarks about the section, but I do have some comments.
This would be a perfect time. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and to each of the planning commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening, and I just want to compliment Brandon and the team in planning. Having worked in planning myself for a number of years and having participated in comp plan rewrites in other locations, including the 2010 one here, I know it's a lot of work, and and trying to make the chapters tie together and complement one another is really an art as much as it is science, and they've done a good job. I was also thinking about the COVID issue and how it would be addressed, and I don't know whether it's better to address it in each chapter or for there to be a supplement in the very beginning of the comp plan that says that this comprehensive plan was prepared prior to the COVID, and obviously and then detail out some of the impacts of the COVID and the emergency. I don't know which is the better way to do it, but clearly there has to be some recognition of the impact of this emergency and pandemic on the community as a whole, and certainly economic development. So I'll stay tuned and wait and everything, but we can certainly provide some details on the impact so far. We've done 2 surveys, and we have details from our employers about some of the impacts so far, so we can provide that. I do want to thank each of you for your comments, and I think that each of the comments is well made, and I wrote down all of them. I'm sure Brandon did too, and I think that it would be good for us to address each of those points in the chapter. I do want to say that I did try very much to, and maybe understated some of the points you all made. For instance, I did want to highlight the fact that the broadband internet is a critical issue, and I did address it in policy number, let's just for a moment. Policy number 5 under infrastructure, it's the final point number 8 under that. It is important, and maybe it should be its own, I mean, it could be its own section for sure, because it clearly has emerged as being a critical issue. So maybe that's a breakout. Maybe it could be one independently. I also want to just say that from an economic development perspective, and we obviously work with a lot of partners on the economic development front to help with retail, particularly retail issues. Downtown, of course, it's the Downtown Frederick Partnership, and on the west side, it's the Golden Mile Alliance. The theory in economic development for many, many years was to focus on the base industries that bring family supporting jobs and wages to the community, because retail has traditionally followed beds and jobs. The minute that you have a certain number of homes in an area, or that you have a certain number of jobs in an area, you tend to start to find retailers moving into that. And so for the longest time, we kind of followed that attitude. But in recent years, we've really focused hard, obviously, on the revitalization of downtown and bringing new retail. And now, more recently, over the last decade or so, on the Golden Mile, as we've struggled to and lost some tenants out on the Golden Mile. And so I don't want to understate those retail points, but just wanted you to understand that we very much are supporting those efforts in those areas, and think that they're very important. But we also are very focused on trying to bring those large family supporting jobs and keep our current industries here and growing as a means of supporting our retail. And I will say that the tourism, which has kind of dropped off obviously to next to nothing at the moment, has been a critical issue in helping support that base of retailers as well, and restaurateurs. I certainly, Mary is on the conference call with me, the meeting with me, and I don't know, Mary, did I leave anything out that you were thinking?
No, I think you hit everything, and I agree with many of the commissioner statements this evening. I think that would be great to expand those sections as well.
Okay, and thank you for your comments. I think it was a perfect time to weigh in. Is there anything else from any of the commissioners before we move on to the policies? Or from anyone else? Okay. Hearing silence, I guess we're ready to move on to the policies then.
Okay, great. So the economic development, well, first let me make an announcement. Sorry, I forgot. We're having some technical difficulties with YouTube. So the little squares are stuck on only a few of us, and they're not transferring when we speak. So it's important now that we say our names before we speak. I am one of the people who is stuck on YouTube. So I will start with the economic development policies, but please just remember to state your name before you speak. Economic Development Policy 1, retain, attract, and train a diverse, creative, and capable resident workforce to support existing and future employment needs. Policy 2, support small business, startup business, and entrepreneurs. Policy 3, maintain a diverse industry mix. Policy 4, maintain a positive business investment environment. Policy 5, maintain and promote adequate infrastructure for planned business growth. Policy 6, encourage revitalization and reinvestment in downtown Frederick and the traditional business corridors.
So we discussed at the last chapter to go question by question, and these policies are pretty rich. I don't have a really good feeling if we have a lot of questions on each of the policies. So why don't I start with Commissioner Burns? And Commissioner Burns, you have comments on a lot of comments on policy 1, or would you like to comment on all the policies at this time?
Well, in my case, I only have comments on number 5. Maybe we try going one by one, and if it gets too burdensome, we'll go.
Okay. Okay. How about we do that then?
I'll comment on 1.
Okay. So policy 1, then we'll go to Commissioner Manalis.
Okay, Commissioner Manalis. I was just looking, okay, so policy 1, I guess, where it says retain, attract, and train a diverse, creative, and capable resident workforce to support existing and future employment needs. I don't think I understood that. Like it said, train, like I don't understand. Could you clarify what you're trying to say there?
Sure. So one of the biggest issues that we have in attracting new major employers to Frederick is around workforce, particularly in the sciences and the technologies, which are 2 of our most strongest areas. They are very concerned about making sure that they can hire sufficient workforce to support those investments in the future here. And they're comparing us to places like the Research Triangle in North Carolina, to Philadelphia, and to Boston, even, believe it or not, California in some areas. And so making sure that our schools, our community college, our higher institutions are all putting out a pipeline of qualified people to take the jobs of the future here. If we need to clarify the language, it may be too many words in one sentence.
No, it's just that, I have an HR background, and when I hear the word train, I'm thinking training the workforce within your organization. And I in no way saw that as you speaking to colleges or universities, providing coursework that will be applicable to getting a job. So maybe, I don't know if the word train, because when I think about train, as I'm just thinking about employees within an organization, and you spoke really well to that, where you mentioned universities and colleges and having degrees or certifications that would be required for a job.
And I do want to also say that we are fortunate that our workforce is also one of our strongest points. Mm-hmm. While it is also one of the biggest challenges in attracting certain industries here, it's also one of our biggest advantages, because we do have a very highly trained, skilled workforce that's here. And so, yeah, I get your point. Maybe we can work on clarifying.
Those were all my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Strawson.
Yes, Commissioner Strawson here. So the draft that I read for this policy 1 just had the policy but no implementation. So I wasn't sure, what some of the implementation strategies for policy 1 were, or if I didn't see the most recent draft. But then another thought that came to me after listening to your response to Commissioner Manalis is, if training our workforce is like the biggest part of that policy 1, then I'm wondering if somewhere in the draft of this chapter, or somewhere in here, we need to have a little bit more information on what resources we have. What's at Hood College, what programs are at FCC, does the people over at Fort Detrick and the various organizations do any, training, any graduate work, that kind of thing, accessibility to graduate programs down in, closer to DC, Johns Hopkins, blah, 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 that might be useful.
Brandon, I don't know if she just has an older version, but I did want to highlight that there are 3 major sub implementation sections there that do list many of the things that you just highlighted.
Okay.
We can get that to you.
Yeah.
Somehow the only thing that I saw was the strike and replace version, and it had the heading implementation, and then everything was redlined, and there was nothing in there.
Okay. So just for everyone's information, I did send 2 versions. I sent a PDF or a Word version, and then of the chapter, and then a PDF of the red line version that compared to 2010. Oh.
Okay.
Sorry, did you guys lose me?
No,
Got you. We heard you.
Okay, sorry. And then a PDF of the red line version comparing the 2010. I believe I emailed both of those, and then both of them are on the web page.
Okay.
You know, one interesting thing that I put in this section that we talked about is, and we hear this frequently from businesses that are coming into the area or expanding, and that is the relationship between workforce and housing. And so I just wanted to point out that you have a housing section in your plan as well, and you're creating a housing department, I think. Is that right? And so I feel as though housing can be a critical component of this as well, looking at, you know, all of the different needs from affordable to CEO level housing. Thank you.
Alderman Russell.
I actually don't have any comments on any of the policies at this point. So I'll just offer that up.
So, thank you. And this is Commissioner Nicholas. And as I read the overview, you had this great comment about basically that it's that the workforce will follow the experience and the kind of experience that they want. And here we're focusing on, I read policy 1 to focus on the training and then this housing component, but what if we actually reached out to our businesses and to the businesses, whether it's the businesses that we're courting and the businesses that we have, and find out what their workforce is looking for. So find out what they want to see more of. And so not just in the area of housing, but what else? What else will work towards accomplishing the retention attraction of this resident workforce? And that was the only other thing I had.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on policy 1? Okay. So we'll go to policy 2, to support small businesses, startup businesses, and entrepreneurs. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns here. I have no comments on policy 2.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, I do have a comment, and I really can't remember the name of the study. I remember Alderman Russell speaking to a while back about a study that was being done. I'm looking at policy number 2, numbers 5, 6, and 7. And isn't there a study, and I don't know what the status is, of looking at minority businesses and how they're faring in terms of getting business? I can't remember what the specific name of the study was or is. But I was wondering, like, if there were any results from that study. Is it still ongoing as I look at 5, 6, and 7 of policy 2?
Mary has been very involved.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mary, you want to?
Yeah, this is Mary Ford Nail. Yes, there's a disparity study presently in process, but the disparity study is really looking at the City of Frederick's procurement policies with regards to how it contracts with minority businesses. So I'm just understand that it's within that context right now that study is occurring.
Okay. So that's what, okay, good. So it's, number 5, support city procurement policies, providing increased opportunities for local, small, minority, and women-owned businesses. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments on policy 2.
Alderman Russell, any?
Alderman Russell, no ma'am, thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Nicholas, I just, on bullet point 7, promote the development of women and minority-owned businesses through partnerships with. I know you added the women to number 6 up there, I believe, with the assistants, but I think you should also have that in number 7. So, any further comment or question on this policy? Okay, alrighty then. Going to policy 3, maintain a diverse industry mix. Excuse me. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns here. The only comment I had was the title kind of drops off, maintain a diverse industry mix, period. And then it goes into all sorts of industrial facilitation and maintenance and recruiting and et cetera. So I added a couple words, and what I added was maintain diversity industrial mix, building on our current industry strengths. Just that, it's some grammar. But the rest
You're
of
going in and out again. I don't know if when you get closer, it seems to help.
Okay, I'm just adding the words maintain a diverse industry mix while building on our current industry strengths. Would that work?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Dinner's coming. Thank you. That's all.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manel's, no comments.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I don't have any comments on policy 3.
Commissioner Alderman Russell.
I have no comments on policy 3. Sorry, here comes my cat.
Okay, and Commissioner
I will not
Nicholas.
throw it.
Commissioner Nicholas also has no comments on policy 3.
Chairwoman, I did want to note that Mary had a change in this where she noticed a mistake in policy 3, number 1. Mary, you want to highlight that one? I might have lost her.
That's okay. Am I there now?
You're there. Yep.
Okay. I just have to pull up my notes. I'm sorry.
I think it was the number of businesses is wrong in that.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, because earlier in the document, we referred to like 3,700 plus businesses, and then later in the document, we refer to 35 or 3,600 businesses. So we just need to be consistent in the document.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent point. Any other comments on this policy? Okay. Policy 4, maintain a positive business investment environment. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, no comment on policy.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manel's, no comments on policy 4.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments on policy 4.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I don't have any comments on policy 4. Thank you.
Commissioner Nicholas will make that unanimous. No comments on policy 4. Any Other comments from anyone? Policy 5, maintain and promote adequate infrastructure for planned business growth. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns here. I do have a comment on item number 3 under implementation. It currently states increased transportation options and access to employment centers, including roads, public transit, bicycle, and pedestrian paths. I just added a couple words in a Google Docs. Increased transportation, added the word mobility options, and more efficient access to the employment centers, etc. And back in the text under investment and economic development, this earlier, that it lists the bullets about road improvements. It says enhance road network, develop new and upgraded roads such as Christmas Crossing. I'm not sure what we're doing to Butterfly Lane.
You need to get closer again. Every other word, we're hearing every other word.
I wanted to add, and it's in the Google Docs. I wanted to add, my basic premise is that we need to focus more on making more efficient use of our current infrastructure as opposed to adding more big projects. You know, we've got Monocacy Boulevard, we have one link, actually one link that's very important for Dietrich on Christmas Crossing, and then it's another link that's less important going down to Route 40. But I think our focus needs to be working more efficiently. There's some signals that could be more efficient, and I all know that accessibility to business is key to business growth. While a certain area may grow over time, it can be accelerated with accessibility. So I think we need to put an emphasis on making traffic more efficient and things like that. I apologize for being one-dimensional transportation guy. If I can add value, I'll try to. That's my major thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bring a lot of value to the group, Commissioner Burns. Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, just a quick comment, and just basically repeat what everyone else has said. In policy 5, number 5 and number 8 basically highlights what we all mentioned should be subparts to this chapter, because you also have it in the policy as well, which is stated perfectly.
Thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, just after Mr. Griffin, right? After his response and discussion of some of our comments, and wondering about whether he should bring that, was it number 8 about the broadband? I would agree that at this point it would be worth bringing more attention to it, or wording it more strongly, or bringing it out from the bottom of the list somehow.
Great. Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, great points. No further comments on this policy.
And Commissioner Nicholas also has no further comments on this policy. Well, policy 6, encourage revitalization and reinvestment in downtown Frederick and the traditional business corridors. Commissioner Burns.
No comment. I'm a big fan of this policy.
Great.
Oh, Commissioner Manalis, sorry.
Commissioner Manalis, yes, I also am a fan of this policy. I'll just say this, though. I think it's just an interesting thought. I see encourage revitalization and reinvestment in downtown Frederick and the traditional business corridors, and I'm just wondering why. I guess downtown Frederick was mentioned, but but not the other business corridors in that title, I guess. I'm just wondering, do we need to mention downtown Frederick since it's already in the body on, number 1 and all the other areas? That was my only comment, because I'm like, it seems to be focusing on one specific area that, and everyone, I want to make sure that we're inclusive is my point. Everyone contributes to the economic development of the city. And so I just wanted to make that point.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Strassen.
Commissioner Strassen, I don't have any further comments on policy 5.
Alderman
Right.
Russell.
6, thank you. I'm getting lost.
Alderman Russell, I would like to concur with Commissioner Manella's comment regarding the inclusion of all of our areas of downtown. Of the city. We do have a tendency sometimes to think of downtown only, and there are a lot of vibrant areas in the city. While that is a unique portion of it, there are other very unique portions of it that we need to make sure we're supporting and capitalizing on.
So, Commissioner Nicholas, point number 3, implement an innovation zone in Frederick to drive tech company expansion in certain geography. Not exactly what in certain geography means, and I feel like this needs a little bit more fleshing out. It sounds exciting, an innovation zone, but so one is I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about that, and I think if you can flesh it out further, that would be helpful. And just right now, what does certain geography mean?
It means we didn't know exactly where to draw the lines yet. So innovation zones are tools that have been used across the country to help bring notoriety to and attract tech companies to a particular area, and to focus programs inside that innovation zone that would help and assist those companies grow and expand. We have a lot of tech companies downtown, but to the points that have been made all along, we're quite sensitive to the fact that we're wanting to help drive innovation to other parts of the community as well. And so I'll be honest with you, I've struggled a little bit with how to craft the geography of an innovation zone that is more inclusive. And so rather than specify a specific geography in here when I didn't know, I just said a certain geography. Maybe it should say to be determined in the future, or we're getting tech companies throughout. I mean, we have tech companies on the Golden Mile. We have a virtual reality company on the Golden Mile now, and I've got tech companies downtown, and we just graduated a company to a building over in the airport. So how you draw an innovation zone around all of those places is hard, but I think there might be some value in continuing to look at the creation of an innovation zone as a tool to help attract tech companies to Frederick. So that's why it's in here without a lot of specificity. But we can be more clear. We can try to be a little more, I can add a little something to it.
But it just as it states, I don't really know. I mean, is it just you're going to draw a boundary around it and call it an innovation zone, or is there something that actually then happens within it? You promote it a certain way? Is there somebody that is hired within the EDA? I mean, I know that you don't know all this, but just the other thought, looking at number 4, says invest in projects and programs such as. It's sort of, I'm not exactly sure where you're going with this. So it feels like a catch-all of some things that need to get done. And it sounds like, so I assume you're not just focusing on the downtown, is that correct?
Correct. Like, for example, over the last decade, we've added sidewalks all down the Golden Mile, along with new crosswalks. And I have to tell you, it's dramatically improved conditions in that sector. and has driven more businesses, I believe, to want to invest in their businesses out there.
Mm-hmm.
So since this is not under the infrastructure, it's encourage revitalization and reinvestment in downtown Frederick and the traditional business corridors. I think if you can define a little bit more, put some definition as to what these, we can read through it and go, all those things sound like good things. But when you read the point itself, it just says invest in, I lost where I was, programs such as.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring this point up. I will say that I'm laughing a little bit because I think you can see that perhaps by the time I got to page 17 and point number 4 under policy 6, I was beginning to run out of steam. But the point here was that we ought to be doing these things in every neighborhood across the city. There's no reason why we can't have public art. I think you've been seeing that now as something that's emerging. Pride in community, pride in neighborhoods drives a lot of desire to invest. And I can work with Brandon and we can maybe try to come up with some better language to describe this point. And maybe parts of this go under infrastructure. It's really, I put it under revitalization and reinvestment because I'm trying to send a signal that these are things that can help attract other investment around it. Yep. Thank you for the point, and we'll work on something there.
So that's it for me for that policy. Any other comments from others?
Alderman Russell, I would just like to jump in. With regard to the innovation zone, perhaps it's not geography at all. Perhaps it's something else that drives it, to disperse it in areas where it's going to be best supported, or I don't know. I don't know if it's a boundary thing. I think that's something that we can talk about in the future, but I think the concept is great. I also struggle with you on what does that mean?
Commissioner Manalis, I just have one other comment as well. And that was for the very last one on policy 6. And I was just curious how number 7 fits into the whole thing.
So in revitalization and in reinvestment in downtown, the downtown parking and circulator study is underway and will be completed and is going to drive a number of new recommendations that will carry our parking and circulator system for the next decade.
Okay.
So I thought that it was important that the comp plan underscore the importance of the implementation of that plan looking forward as a means of supporting downtown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am actually looking at the marked up version. So I'm trying to flesh out where 7 starts. Is it 7 starts with the implement? Yes. Okay. The downtown parking and circulator study. Recommendations. Okay. Got it. Thank you. That's it, right? There's so much that's crossed out looking at the red line that's difficult. All right. I think we just went through all the policies. I'm looking online. I still don't see any numbers. I will announce again. If anybody is watching, would like to make any comment, the call-in number is 929-229-5669, and the passcode is 952-444-745#. And we'll wait a short while, and in the meantime, we all can tee up for our third and final chapter of the night, which is the fiscal. But let's keep this up just in case we do get someone to call in. No one's calling in. All
Madam
right.
Chair, I'm going to step away for just a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, that's
Sorry.
good.
All right.
Let's plan.
So I'll jump into fiscal. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard and Mary. Really appreciate your time. And thank you, Katie, for being so patient. The fiscal chapter is a very brief overview of the city's financial health. Here, let me share my screen. The city's financial health. It's been in the comp plan for many years. It's not necessarily a requirement by the state or the land use article, but generally it summarizes general fund revenues, expenditures, our current tax rate. The purpose is really to outline how the city's fiscal plan will support the growth outlined in the plan. You will see we do summarize the 2019 Tischler-Bice cost of land use fiscal impact analysis that was performed last year but not adopted. The study revealed all land uses cost more than the revenue they gathered for the county except single family, office, and industrial. There were many assumptions to the study that could have easily swayed the results. I'll admit that I'm not an expert on its findings. The purpose of recommending it in this section was to really recommend that we might have to follow up on its findings. With that, the policies really didn't change, but we'll get to that here in a few minutes.
Okay, we'll take a roll call again for comments, questions for the overview. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, no comments on the overview.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, the only comment I have really is the impact of COVID-19 to this specifically, and not just really COVID-19, but, anything that could, potentially impact, funding or funds, external factors. So I wanted to see something in here that spoke to that as well in this chapter.
Noted.
Anything else?
That's it for now.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I have no comments on the overview. Thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Nicholas also has no comments. So that takes us to the policies.
Okay. So as I stated, the policies are very similar. There was some touch up to them. Policy 1, identify dedicated revenue for funding capital improvements. Policy 2, encourage growth that enables the city's non-residential tax base to comprise a larger share of the overall tax base. Policy 3, evaluate expenditures for both current fiscal impacts as well as impacts on future budgets to avoid creating long-term fiscal imbalances. Policy 4, maintain a diversified and stable revenue system. 5, maintain sufficient unrestricted fund balance to maintain creditworthiness and provide resources for emergencies or unexpected needs. 6, adhere to credit industry standards and recommendations for debt management to maintain creditworthiness and ensure lowest borrowing cost possible. Lastly, 7, establish and maintain fiscal monitoring system to measure progress towards achieving the policies of this chapter.
So I have to ask a question. The document I'm looking at doesn't have the same language. I'm looking at one of the two things you sent us out that's not marked up.
Interesting.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
And it only has 6 policies, not 7.
Right. 6 instead of 7, and the language is very different.
I do not know. I apologize. Let me see if I can pull
I have
up.
6 policies.
Yeah, 6, right.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull up the latest version and share screen.
Okay, and I'm going to go back to the marked up version. It was just so marked up, I chose to not look at that one.
Yep.
Let me look at your fiscal PDF.
Yeah, the version you guys have is correct. The version in my book is a previous version. So let me do that again.
Okay. You go back to the one I had then.
I believe they're mostly the same, but I'll go through it again. Identify dedicated revenues for funding capital improvements. 2, evaluate expenditures for both current fiscal impacts as well as impacts on future budgets to avoid creating long-term fiscal imbalances. 3, maintain a diversified and stable revenue system. 4, maintain sufficient unrestricted fund balance to maintain creditworthiness and provide resources for emergencies for unexpected needs. 5, adhere to credit industry standards and recommendations for debt management to maintain creditworthiness and ensure the lowest borrowing cost possible. 6, establish and maintain fiscal monitoring systems to measure progress towards achieving the policies of the land use element.
Great. All right, so policy 1, identify dedicated revenues for funding capital improvements. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns here. I think I look at these policies as moving forward, whereas the beginning of the chapter gives a snapshot of where we are today. These policies are where we want to go in the next 10 or 20 years. And the big point I want to make is that we need to be more diligent in seeking state and federal sources for funding to either reduce local costs or to leverage more projects. The city historically has not done that on the major projects like Monocacy Boulevard, and I think it's worth the extra staff time and in order to deal with the strings that are attached to the federal and state funding. I think that's a big source of income for capital improvements. On a secondary note, on number 2 under implementation, it says ensure that new growth pays for its fair share of capital facilities, agreed, through impact fees, period. There's got to be more than just impact fees. And I've suggested language perhaps that include other entitlements like APFO fair share contributions. I mean, the fair share contributions in some ways can be a black box, and one can do better at getting more contributions towards CIP projects. From a policy standpoint, the question is do you want to, and this is a broader issue that encompasses all the goals, is do you want to be doing things to encourage job growth? And if you want to encourage job growth, then you want to reduce the entitlement costs, which is contrary to this goal. On the other hand, where are you going to get the income? I can say in Carroll County, where they are starving for jobs. That's not our problem in the city of Frederick. But in Carroll County, they're starving for jobs. They exempt any kind of commercial development for APFO. That's a policy that they have because they want to make it as easy as possible for job growth. But it's not so great for income. Whereas when it comes to housing, they create a larger entitlement cost. So that doesn't necessarily, that issue, I'm not suggesting we do that issue because we're not starved for jobs. But I think we should be thinking about, staff and the smart people should be thinking about whether or not we want to focus more on getting a development community to pay more, and if so, should it be targeted more towards the housing as opposed to the commercial? So that's my those are my issues. Not so much recommendations, just issues that are out there.
Noted. Thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, I'll just add to number 2 what Commissioner Burns said, which basically I had put down question mark, or I put down the comment, just impact fees. You know, is it just other, you know, other streams of, you know, revenue in terms of just impact fees or expenses? So that was the only thing that I put down was that question mark, and, you know, is there anything else besides impact fees?
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell. Brandon, when you first read through the version that you had in your packet, and there were 7 policies, the policy number 2 is omitted in this revised version, which says encourage growth that enables the city's non-residential tax base to comprise a larger share of the overall tax base. That, with the implementation of maintaining the jobs-rich nature of city's economy and an approximate ratio of 2 jobs to 1 household. That's in the 2010 plan. It did not get translated over to this version, so I don't know if that was intentional or just an omission. So it would be the policy 2 in the old comp plan, in the current comp plan.
Policy 2, and yeah, not sure. I will have to go back and look at the edit history, and I apologize.
No,
I have no explanation of what's going on here right now.
No, that's okay. I mean, the version that I'm looking at is, we have the right version here, but in reviewing it, I noticed in comparing it to 2010 that one was omitted.
Right.
And if it was omitted for a reason, that would be interesting to know. And if it wasn't, then we'll put it back in. But so you know, it's just speaking to what are our goals for, you know, the ratio of jobs, etc. And if it is that, then make sure it's back in there.
Okay, understand.
Perfect. To the Commissioner Burns' point with regard to exploring additional state and federal funding, I agree and wanted to let you know that we do have funding for a federal grants coordinator that we're working on implementing so that we can pursue some of that. So it's a good point. Thank you for that. It can be tedious, but it's free money. Not free, but, you know, different money.
So Commissioner Nicholas, I had to smile on this one as Commissioner Burns and Manalis pointed to number 2. So when I put my development hat on, I think of the different, whether it's amenities that developers are required to pay for or proffers. And so I think there are many different ways that other than impact fees, that new growth can make contributions to capital improvements in the city. So that was I only had a comment the same that others had made. Anything else for policy 1 before we go to policy 2? Policy. Oh, go ahead. No? Okay. Policy 2, evaluate expenditures for current fiscal impacts as well as impacts on future budgets to avoid creating long-term fiscal imbalances. Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns has no comment on this or any other goal or policy, unless some other commissioner says something that I want to comment on. Thanks.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comment for number 2.
Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strassen, I actually have no comments on any of the remaining policies.
Okay. We'll still call your name, just
Okay,
in case.
that's fine.
Want to make sure you, Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, no comments on number 2.
I have a question. What's an enterprise operation?
Oh, I'll take this one. Hi, Katie Barkle, Director of Budget and Purchasing for the city. Good evening. I've not addressed the Planning Commission ever, actually, in my career at the city. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here tonight. Enterprise fund is a business-like activity. At the city, our enterprise funds are our water and sewer fund, our parking fund, airport, and stormwater. They are primarily funded through a fee-for-service type activity. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I don't know if we talked about this in the past or if we need a definition section or we should have just explained it a little bit just so anybody else who's reading this, I think you could flesh that out. And I don't know if others agree with that. I just didn't know what it was. Any other comments or questions on this policy? And I think that was a very good implementation item. Policy 3, maintain a diversified and stable revenue system. Commissioner Burns?
I'm all for that.
Good comment. Commissioner Manalis?
Copy that. I agree, Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Strassen?
Commissioner Strassen, no comments on this policy.
Alderman Russell?
Alderman Russell, I have no additional comments. Thank you.
And Commissioner Nicholas also has no additional comments. Policy 4, maintain sufficient unrestricted fund balance to maintain creditworthiness and provide resources for emergencies or unexpected needs.
That's a good one.
Yeah, we should go straight to Commissioner Manalis, but I will start with Commissioner Burns.
I have nothing to add to that good comment, that good policy.
Commissioner Manalis. Commissioner Manalis. No comments. I mean, I focus on the last two words, unexpected needs, emergencies, I think we already talked about initially the comments that I made earlier about, as we look at this chapter, that's a blueprint for us for the next, 20, 30 years that we think about some of the things that would impact us. And that's really it. And so in that section as well, it's fine.
Commissioner Strassen.
Yep, Commissioner Strassen, I agree. It's something we really need to think about. No other comments on the policy.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, I'll just make a general comment that, on number 3, we say avoid using unreserved fund balance to finance ongoing expenditures. We do have a fiscal policy that outlines a whole lot of things, so I would just want to make sure that any of these implementations or language that is in this are absolutely consistent and no more smushy than what is in our fiscal policies, because we've been diligent over the last decade in putting some very stringent requirements in place, and I appreciate Katie's wonderful work on that, and it's put the city in a pretty good position. So I don't want anything in this to undermine the work that's been done there.
Commissioner Nicholas, so the only thing that comes to mind for me in this is, and it's probably not anything to write that would be a change, but the case study that we're all living in will, I'm sure, much inform what needs to be set aside for emergencies and unexpected needs. So that just it just cries out for that kind of whoever you sit down with, then review everything and figure out, and it may look very different going forward than it has looked up to date. Any other comments or questions on policy 4?
If I could, sorry, just to chime in, this is Katie Bartle again. We do have a policy that sets an unrestricted fund balance. We call it the rainy day fund, and that's 12% of our reoccurring revenue in the general fund. It sits about $11 million right now. We have not had to use it since we implemented that back in 2010. We do have guidelines on how it can be used and how it can be paid back. So just so you know that we do have a policy in place. It was blessed by our financial advisors, and the credit agencies are very happy with where we sit. So just letting you know.
Thank you. I'm very impressed.
Congratulations. Right. That's a good thing. Policy 5, adhere to credit industry standards and recommendations for debt management to maintain credit worthiness and ensure the lowest borrowing cost possible. Commissioner Burns.
I think Katie just said it all on that one, but yes, no comment.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, no comment.
Commissioner Strawson.
I have no comments. This is Commissioner Strawson.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, the only comment I'll have is it's interesting, of all of the chapters that we've talked about, this is the one that's just been sort of slow and steady wins the race, and it's nice to know that policies set 10 years ago are still valid now and are providing a really good roadmap for us.
Yeah.
That's what it's supposed to do.
Well said. Commissioner Nicholas, I have no comments either. Policy, let's see, this is our last policy. Before I do this, just in case there's anybody who wants to make comment, the number to call in is 929-229-5669. The password is 952-444-745 #, and we will take calls after this next policy. Policy 6, establish and maintain a fiscal monitoring system to measure progress toward achieving the policies of the land use element. Commissioner Burns.
That sounds very exciting. I have no comment. I would have a general comment at the end of our session, Madam Chair, if you would give us an opportunity. Thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
No comments. I equally was excited when I saw the words fiscal monitoring system and measuring.
Commissioner Strawson. Commissioner Strawson.
Commissioner Strawson, I have no comments.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell, no further.
And Commissioner Nicholas also has no further comments. Any other comments on this section from anyone?
No.
Okay, I thought it was excellent, and I hadn't thought about what Alderman Russell said, but I thought it was a really well done and solid chapter. So overall comments then before we take, and right now I'm not seeing any phone numbers up, so it doesn't look like anyone has called in. So I'll do a roll call then for that. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've heard a lot about the how we're going to be planning for COVID-19, and I want to suggest that a comprehensive plan needs to be a combination of vision of where we want to be in 2030, 2040, what direction we want to go. At the same time, it needs to be somewhat reality-based. Often, Alderman Russell keeps me based in reality, and I think that's a necessary. I mean, I used to be the person who got visionaries and to be real, but maybe it's my age. But it needs to be a little bit of both, and I think so often we seem to plan to the future about what the way it is today, and I think some of the lessons learned with the with what we're going through is a need for a good reserve fund, or whatever we call it, the $10 million we have, and that's going to come into play when tax revenues are going down in future years, if we go into a recession. But I I think good solid planning means that we have to not necessarily be wed to the way things are today. Certainly, a broader issue might be that Amazon and the home delivery of retail goods are basically going to shut down a lot of retail. The big boxes are going to be affected, the big chains, as well as Main Street. Main Street 10 years from now might be mostly restaurants, or maybe dress shops, because you can't try on a dress online. But things are going to change. The transportation is going to change, needing more drop-off and pickup space, and maybe less parking. Who knows? But I think we need to not be too serious about the current situation. The current situation is an enzyme. It's going to more rapidly, I think, eat into retail. But the broader issues really will control in the next 10 or 20 years. So that's my encouragement to staff and to the experts, is to keep one foot in reality, but at the same time focus on where we want to be, not necessarily where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Manalis.
Commissioner Manalis, I agree with Commissioner Burns and what he said in terms of our future and a good plan. And I also think that good plan also anticipates what could possibly come. And having language or vision in certain chapters that speak to that. It doesn't have to focus on COVID-19, but focus on any unexpected events. Because the future for Frederick, and I assume it would be for everyone else may feel the same way, is that, we want to be able to be resilient and not have to stop and go because something is happening. We want to basically set ourselves up for success in terms of what we want the city to look like and operate, 20, 30 years from now. So that was my only comment about that. But I thought that the chapters were good. And I think that Brendan is right to, go back and look at some of those chapters and see how, how things could possibly change in the future and what that might look like. And I think Alderman Kelly and Swatson said it best about, telecommuting and teleworking and infrastructure and stuff like that, which is, now more in the forefront and possibly in the future than it was previously. So that's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Strawson.
Yeah, Commissioner Strawson, I agree with both of the previous speakers. And if anything that the situation has shown us is how quickly the way things are today can become totally different. And so we just need to put our bizarre imaginations in place and look to the future. I would like to ask Brandon before we sign off, just given the lack of public comments, just make sure that he makes a statement so that people know what other opportunities, sending in written comments or any other ways that the public can comment on these 3 chapters if they were not able to figure out Microsoft Teams.
Sure, I can do that now. You can attend future public hearings. Send me an email at bmark, City of Frederick, Maryland.gov. It recently changed. Call me at 301-600-1248 and attend future hearings.
Great, thank you. Is the city still taking written comments on chapters?
We are.
Okay.
We are.
Good. All right, thank you.
Alderman Russell.
Alderman Russell here. This will also, once we've finished all of our chapters here with the Planning Commission, then it's going to go to the Board of Aldermen for workshops as well. So there will be ample opportunity for people to weigh in as we move along, and hopefully we'll be to a point where we don't necessarily have to have virtual meetings. But to Commissioner Manalis and everyone else's point, And we don't know. And I'm wondering, to that end, if it is worth considering having a standalone chapter that deals with emergency preparedness, resilience. They do sort of stretch across everything. So I don't know if it's something that you can separate out, but there definitely needs to be more of a focus on what if we can't do things normally? How do we stand on our own 2 feet? So I think those points are really well taken, and I appreciate them being brought up. I also appreciate the hard work that's been done on this draft so far. It's an enormous amount of work. It is a lot of collaboration. So thank you to everybody that has worked on it. Plus, I think it's going to be really pretty looking at the layout. Very cool.
Thank you, Arash.
Thanks, Arash.
Commissioner Nicholas, I really I appreciate the statement that Commissioner Burns made, and the balancing the vision with the reality, and obviously that's a hugely important. When you look at a plan and you can get excited about it and you can see the vision, but you also know that that can be accomplished, that it's just not something that you're going to stick on a shelf because it's, oh yeah, it sounds really, really good, but we're never going to get there. The one thing that struck me and why I felt strongly that we need to integrate COVID in an appropriate way, while still making sure that we keep that looking towards the future and the vision, et cetera. The other day I heard, and this just makes sense, that what we're going through now has the most impact globally of any event since World War II. So I think back on, I was not here, but World War II, that changed so much. And when they started it, you could not have imagined how that would have changed and come out the other way, the whole highway system and suburbia, et cetera, et cetera. So we certainly can't see what the other side of this is going to look like. But when I think about just, wow, what kind of impact this will have on us and our future, it's going to be significant. So, all right. Any last words from anyone? I've actually enjoyed this. I enjoy looking at your faces. So, instead of looking out. So anyway.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed it too.
All right. Well, hearing nothing else, the meeting is adjourned.
All right, that sounds good.
Have a good evening, all.
Good night, all.